of leadership. Thank you, and thank you so much for welcoming and allowing me to be with you all today. So the purpose is I'm going to introduce a concept of the stages of leadership that human beings go through, and hopefully I'm going to help you identify potentially where you are. And I will also I'll back this up with a Harvard Business Review article that you can all read later on, which gives you more information. But the purpose is really just to look at the role of your consciousness and your sense-making skills as a leader of yourself, of systems and the issues that you're facing, and hopefully with the view that it will unlock some insight that might help you be more powerful and more impactful in the world. And as I say, please just jump in if there's anything that doesn't make sense or you have any questions. Okay. So the first slide is, I just want to read some text a little bit about Nelson Mandela, who is one of the most evolved leaders of our generation, in our opinion. And I just wanted to read some text out about him. When he was released after 27 years in prison in South Africa, he inherited the presidency of a country on the verge of civil war. The mindset and expectation of many was that this was his chance to seek retribution on the whites and to take back the country for his black constituents. In short, it was payback time. But Mandela saw the world differently. Rather than take the simple path of revenge, he invited all South Africans to follow him to a higher plane and build a rainbow nation that shone not because of its uniformity, but because of its diversity. Mandela's ability to lead the country through a healing process of reconciliation and hope had less to do with his content knowledge and had much more to do with his ability to take on an extremely volatile and complex situation and create a higher meaning out of it for his countrymen and countrywomen. This is the path of a highly developed mind. Mandela perfectly embodies Einstein's quote that we can't solve our current problems from the same level of consciousness used to create them. The problem of apartheid had been created from one level of development, and its resolution required a leader who can think and act from a level above it. The leaders in organizations face the same challenge. Their environments are growing increasingly complex, and for many, that complexity is overwhelming their capacity to cope. Much of the stress these days has less to do with workload and more to do with the strain of trying to make sense of an environment that has become too complex for one's current stage of development. So for me, what those words mean is that Mandela was able to lift his level of thinking above everyone else's and search for higher meaning. And his 27 years in prison enabled him to develop through those levels of consciousness. He certainly entered prison at a lower and earlier stage of development, but came out higher than anyone else around him. And that's hopefully the journey that we're going to talk about today. I'll quickly just stop just to say, does that make sense in terms of why we're here today and the hope of higher levels of consciousness for yourselves and those people around you? I'd just love to hear a share just to make sure that people can hear me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of them have been put on mute so that there's no other distraction, Mac. For participants, you could also just raise your hand. If you look at the bottom screen, you could see there's participants and chat and all of it. So there's also a place where it says raise hand. So you could just raise hand to say yes or I agree.
Okay,
so that you don't
fantastic.
Have to keep unmuting.
Okay.
Jonathan says it sounds good. Great, good. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll move on to this. So let me first of all describe the elevated sense-making model. And if I could just say something that the levels of consciousness have been studied by various people from all around the world, from China, from the US, from Europe, and India and Asia. And what's really interesting is that even though the work was all done separately, they all concluded the same thing. And what they found was that in the same way that a child has clear development stages, adults also have clear development stages. though it's much less obvious to see it. With a child, it's really obvious to see the difference between a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old. You see the distinct changes in their development. Whereas in adults, because we've stopped growing, it becomes a little bit more sophisticated to do that. And then what happens with many of us is we stop at a development stage and don't progress beyond that. And broadly for adults, there are 7 major levels of development: the way that we view the world, the way we view ourselves. And if we want to make systemic transformation in the world, we need to elevate our sense making around and towards the higher levels if we want to make a really big difference and for it to stay amazing once we've gone. So I'll briefly explain them, and then I'll get into we'll do a little test to see where we are and in terms of how you develop your sense making skills, and then I'll give you a little survey just to see where are you, and then you can assess where you are on your journey. And then finally, I'll give some tips, no matter on what stage you might be, what will elevate you to the next level, with the view that we all want to aim to be at the next Gandhi and the next Mandela, and all the studies have shown people like Gandhi and people like Mandela and Lee Kuan Yew and Rosa Parks, they all got to the highest level of consciousness. So let me briefly explain each one. So the first one is called the opportunist. And the broad mindset, and I'll keep it simple, is I live to make my life the best possible for me. So it's quite a self-centered view of the world. And good in emergencies, sometimes if you've got sales teams in companies, people who are opportunists, they're so driven by their self-drive and their self-interest, they're actually pretty good at being salespeople. So there are some conditions where opportunists can really excel. And what happens is often in people who tend to be in their young teens, they tend to be in this stage of, how do I optimize my life so that it's the best for me? And then what happens is that they freeze at that level of development as they become an 18-year-old and a 25-year-old and a 40-year-old and a 50-year-old, and they stay in that stage. So that's the opportunist. The next level is the diplomat. And a lot of people tend to get to that age often in their late teens and early 20s. And the diplomat, the core of it is, I want to fit in, and I want to be like everyone else. So what we'll often see in late teenagers is they will all dress the same, or they'll all listen to the same music. And the core thing is about my belonging. Who am I as part of? And then a lot of people then freeze in that. So they don't want to rock the boat, and they stay diplomatic, they stay quiet. And if they join organizations, they're the last people to stand and go, what's a different opinion to other people. So the core to the diplomat is fitting in and being part of a tribe. Some of the work I've done is in conflict contexts, and one of my theories is a lot of the militant groups have got lots of diplomats because their mindset is about fitting in. I'm part of this group type thing. So there's a certain proportion of adults who never progress beyond those because they, for whatever reason, they don't jump out of that. The next level is the expert. And about 35% of business leaders and government leaders around the world, this is the ceiling of where they get to. And the expert has got a very strong mindset around about expertise, about logic, about thinking and capability. And a lot of people, especially people who are in dedicated services like lawyers, accountants, scientists, a lot of them get to this stage, and then there's no reason for them to move to the next level. So the people they respect most in life are the people who are the best in their field. As a small example, I remember talking to this hedge fund manager a few years ago, and I said, who do you respect most in the world? And it was the hedge fund manager that made the most money in the world. And it was a classic expert response. His view of the world was all through the lens of my expertise of being a hedge fund manager. Or if it's an engineer, you might respect the best engineers in the world. Or if you're a lawyer, the people you respect most are the best lawyers in the world. And again, it's about 35% of business leaders and government leaders, that is the ceiling that they get to. The next level is the achiever, and the achiever, this is what we could talk about, the shift from knowing to being inquisitive. And the achiever are people who realize that they don't know very much actually, and they're quite comfortable not knowing the answer. And so their style of leadership comes very much about, I can lead a multifunctional team, I can lead a multicultural team, and I can become very inspiring. And about 30% of business and government leaders, that's the ceiling where they get to. And what's really interesting about them is that what we see time and time again in businesses, if you give an achiever like a project to say, can you go set up this project in this new country, or set up this new, out all the different functions, and they can inspire towards a goal. And actually businesses love these types of leaders, but the shortcoming of them is they don't question how worthy are their goals. So looking at me personally, I remember about 14 years ago, I had this job. It was a global role. It was completely meaningless, but I didn't care. I was respected for my job. And I was right in the stage of that early achiever thing. I loved working in multicultural environments. I loved not knowing the answer, but I didn't really challenge the nature of the goals. So then you have this thing which we often call the midlife crisis. And it's the shift into post-conventional leadership. And sometimes for people, there's only about 15% of leaders in the world who excel beyond this point. And often it gets catalyzed by something big in one's life, often losing a close member of your family, or something can just shift something that creates an uncomfortable moment that really questions what is your purpose, what is your legacy. And the first phase is called the individualist. And the individualist is really good at questioning themselves, understanding there's paradox in the world, there's polarities, there's multiple points of view in the world, there's no right, there's no wrong, and they see the complexity. Whereas achievers often will look at the world by there's a right and there's a wrong. Experts definitely think about the world versus right and versus wrong, whereas individualists start being able to hold a polarity of thoughts and a polarity of complexity, and be able to hold multiple different thoughts and respect them all. The downside of individualists is they hold them all, but they don't know what they really think. And this is the next stage, what we call the strategist. And the strategist is able to go into a big global organization, a government organization, and generate transformation in that, whether it's 1,000 people, 100 people, 10,000 people. So a good example is Lou Gerstner. He was an American, or still is an American, and he transformed IBM. Sorry, someone talking? Should I keep going?
Yeah, I think Mackie could continue. I think someone just logged in and did not mute himself.
Did not mute, okay. And then the final level of transformation is what we call the alchemist. And the alchemist is like a Gandhi, like a Lee Kuan Yew, like a Rosa Parks, like a Martin Luther King. They are able to look at the world and generate societal transformation. And it can be at a national or a global level, or it can be just within a community and within a village. So it doesn't have to be grand and massive, but they see everything, and they can bring it together and have a point of view about how to generate societal transformation. And that's the big difference between a strategist and an alchemist. So I'll keep going unless anyone's got any questions. But the one thing I would just say is that all the studies in the world have been done on consciousness. They all conclude that you can't miss a stage. And typically the fastest you can go from one stage to the next is about 4 years. And but you can pass through it quite quickly, which means you become quite undeveloped in that. But just to say, you can't leap from, say, expert to alchemist. You need to go through the stages in life, and we'll talk about how do you make all those stages happen. But I'll just quickly stop and just say, does that all make sense? And if I'm going too fast or too slow, please just let me know. But I'll just love to hear from one person to say whether it makes sense or any questions. Yep. Okay. I'll keep going.
Prasad Kulkarni, your hand is raised. So just wondering if it is still raised from the beginning or you have a question right now.
Okay. I'll keep going. Thank you. So I'll just briefly touch on this. The levels of sense making is first of all your understanding of who you are and what's happening within you is the first attention that we need. So to understand and transform others, we need to have transformed ourselves. And every alchemist or strategist I've ever met in the world, they say that it all started with realizing who they were. And I love the quote from Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, 6th century BC philosopher, who said, "To know others is wisdom. To know yourself is enlightenment. To control others is strength. To control yourself is true power." And what he meant by that is the hardest journey is to know who you really are and your strengths and the way you derail and the way that you have your beliefs, how you come to conclusions. The more you know about yourself, the better you'll be able to transform others and transform people around you. So that's the personal. The interpersonal is about your knowledge of the relationships that you have. And then there's you, there's me, and how do I interact? And then there's finally looking at the whole wider system and your understanding to go, these are the levers that I can pull. If I pull these levers, this is how the system will change. And being able to sense make all of that. And as we go through all those different stages, our abilities to understand ourselves, our abilities to understand the dynamics and to understand the system evolves significantly from one stage to the other. So an opportunist would have no chance of creating systemic transformation, whereas the alchemist can bring all of these three things together. And I'll just quickly touch on this. The majority of the world and the majority of business leaders and government leaders and NGOs are in the major stages of expert, achiever, individualist, and strategist. And I imagine on this call, the majority of us will be in one of these four stages. And I'll just briefly touch on the different thinking styles. So the expert is, they see one point, they see another point, and they conclude, and that's broadly their thinking style. The achiever can see cause and effect. Because of this, it drives this. Because of this, it drives this. And therefore, I conclude this. I have a friend who works for the Prime Minister of United Kingdom. She's called Theresa May. And he says that when you go into meetings with her, she says, because of this, then causes that. Because of this, because then causes that. So therefore, this is my conclusion. And we personally think that she is an achiever Prime Minister. Whereas I'm not going to say whether we think she's a good or a bad Prime Minister, but we think that that's her thinking style. And you see it in the way that she talks on TV, etc. So then the individualist is able to do that cause and effect, but on multiple thought processes. So, this person, these group of people think this way, this group of people think this way, and I can hold the two together. And then the strategist, it's all about landing and going, there's all these six ways of looking at this issue. And I now, because of that, this is what I think. So the individualist often gets stuck and confused and doesn't know where to turn, whereas the strategist is able to land and go, this is my opinion, I've considered everything, and this is where I land. So there's a strong opinion in the expert and the achiever, The individualist becomes a bit kind of, I don't know where I stand. And then the strategist comes back to the strong opinion again. So hopefully this is all making sense. So I've got a little quiz, and I need one of you to help me out. So the way that we work out our level of sense making is what we call sentence completion. And what happens is you complete a sentence like rules are, and you write it, and then one of our specialists at Bridge will determine the complexity of your response and be able to tell you. Well, we do it across about 31 sentences, and they'll be able to tell you what is your major level of sense making. This goes from one order to another. So I would just love if someone would take a stab and say, what is the correct order from least sophisticated thinking to most sophisticated? So if you think the least sophisticated is stupid and the most sophisticated is created to provide structure in which freedom abides, that would be one. If you think it's another order, 2 or 3. So can someone have the courage to have a go and tell me what they think is the order from least sophisticated to most sophisticated? I'll just give you 10 seconds. It'd be great if someone could take a stab. I can't read the chat room, so if there's a chat room going on, it'd be great if someone could to say what's going on.
Sure. So Aparna Mehra has written in the chat saying she feels 1 is her choice.
Fantastic. Okay, that is the correct answer. So thank you for doing that and being courageous to do that. So I'll quickly explain or my view about why it goes from least sophisticated to more sophisticated. So rules are stupid. So that's kind of quite a opportunist response. And so you can kind of just see, like a young child going, rules are stupid type thing. And then the next level is to be followed. So that's kind of the diplomat. All rules are there. The laws are all there. I shall follow them. I don't want to rock the boat. The next level is to keep us civilized. So it might be an expert legal response to it. The next level is useful to simplify interactions. So that will be maybe how Achiever would look at laws. And then an opportunist might start look at that and go, are made to be broken in extenuating circumstances. And then finally, a strategist might think, are created to provide structure in which freedom abides. So there's a sophistication in the thinking about that. There was an event recently in Singapore where the Deputy Prime Minister was challenged about why Singapore has such stringent laws. And his response was, we are so stringent in our laws, our death penalty to drugs, our death penalty for murder, and the fact there is no compassion in our legal system, but it is the safest country in the world to walk around in, and it provides a whole load of other freedom. So you can see in his response, not necessarily where you would agree with him, but a sophistication in his understanding of what law is really about, that if it's created in a certain way, it creates more freedom than any of the other systems. So hopefully that all makes sense, and thank you for jumping in with the conclusion. If we wanted to have another go, there's a second one, but I'm running out of time, so I'll move through that. But there's lots of different ways of evaluating our development stage. So when I'm 28 minutes in and 27 minutes in, so I have 13 minutes left, and I'm going to now help you to assess your development stage. So I'm not going to talk through this all, but this text, which you will get later, helps you explain the differences in cognitive, the thinking, the interpersonal, the relational, and then the personal for expert, achiever, individualist, and strategist. But what I'll do is just focus a little bit on the personal, because I think that's a really interesting side, and hopefully it will make sense. So the expert is beginning to be able to examine their own thoughts and feelings and often judge them whether they're right and wrong. What the expert doesn't do is kind of evaluate where do those feelings come from. Whereas the achiever starts getting a good understanding of their thoughts and feelings about themselves they're less able to see how the internal aspects arise and where those beliefs and assumptions come from, but they're noticing that there are beliefs and assumptions that they're operating from. When you move to individualist, the personal is you become quite aware of your own process and your conflicts. You become increasingly aware of your own unique experience and how that has shaped the person you are, the belief systems you are. Whereas when you move to strategists, you start seeing the conflicts within you, your response, and you can start playing with that and start manipulating the way that you engage with the world. So the big jump from individualist to strategist is the individualist is able to observe the world and then play in it, whereas the strategist is be able to intervene and go, I impact the world in this way, and so therefore I can therefore intervene in a more helpful way. So hopefully that all makes sense. But I'd like to just really finish on this slide and then get people to kind of nominate where they are. So I'll just touch on a couple of things, and as I go through though. The opportunist has a time frame about a couple of days, and a key goal is about power, defending power, getting goodies, getting control, getting one's own way. I'll just maybe just focus on that. You can read what the reward is on that side. The diplomat is, the time frame is a couple of weeks. The key goal is keeping things running smoothly, being accepted and being loved. So remember I was talking about not rocking the boat, making sure that they fit in, and gaining approval is really important. The expert has got a time frame that extends to a couple of months, and their key goal is around efficiency, being correct, knowing one's stuff, being professional. Chief reward, being right. So there's a quote from the Turkish philosopher, I've forgotten his name. He said, "There's a field beyond right and wrong. I'll meet you there." His name will come to me shortly. Thank you so much. But he was definitely well beyond the expert, whereas the expert is, there's a place of right, there's a place of wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. That's how they look at the world. The achiever goes to a time frame of 1 to 2 years, and their key goal is effectiveness. So a big difference between expert and an achiever is an expert will quite happily write a report on something every week with no real concern of whether that report is helpful in any way, whereas the achiever is more concerned about, is this actually effective? Can I challenge this? And the achiever's chief reward is recognized for one's contribution to the company. So again, many of my clients, they're big multinationals, and I have so many achiever clients, who are directors of this function or that, and what they really care about is being recognized for running this business, running that business well, etc. The individualist can hold the here and now, is much more present, but also has a much longer term. And the key goal is understanding their own personality. So there's a very big inward look about who am I and what is my place in the world. Their chief reward is feeling clever, being unconventional. They often irritate other people. They often irritate people around them, and makes me think I'm an early individualist, maybe myself, because I appear to irritate many people around me. The strategist is got a time frame of 5 to 10 years. Their key goal is optimizing interaction of people and systems. So they challenge the system. So when they will join an organization, they'll go, why do we do this? Or why are we focused on this? Or why are we doing this? So they'll challenge the rules and the operating systems around them. And what they care about is a sense of interconnection, positive influence for the long term, and freedom to create a common vision. And then the alchemists, the Gandhis, the Lee Kuan Yews, Martin Luther Kings, the Mandelas, they have able to think about the short, the middle, and the very, very long term. Their key goal is about true transformation and being fully engaged in life and feeling alive and vibrant and empowered and liberating others. So an example of an alchemist I met a couple of years ago in Singapore, he built Changi Airport. For any of you who have traveled to Singapore, it's often cited as the best airport in the world. And I asked him, I said, how did you build such a great airport? And he said, I built it for 40 years' time. I built it for what Singapore needed in 40 years, not for what they needed in 5 years. Whereas I've met the builder of one of the terminals of Heathrow Airport, which has already been outgrown and not working very well. And he had a time frame of building it for 5 years, not for 40 years. So you just see in different airports construction the different levels of intellect and the way that they sense make. So I know I've talked a lot and given lots of input, but I'd love to hear, if you could go into the chat room and say, where do you see yourself as in your development stage? And Vaishnavi, would you help me in seeing in what people are writing?
Sure. So basically, you just want all of them to reflect on where they are right now, in which stage of leadership,
yes.
Right?
Which stage?
So whether they are an opportunist or an individualist or achiever, right?
Exactly. Just to answer one word, and with the view that there's nothing good or bad, there's strengths in everything, and we're all on a journey. So,
So Anisha puts in her response. She says she's a diplomat.
Diplomat. Okay. Thank you so much.
I think I would be a similar level as you, Mac, individualist. I probably do irritate a lot of people with that.
If you notice you irritate people, that's a good sign you're an individualist.
Yeah. So what about others? Where do you think you fall under? We've got 20 participants, so hoping to get some answers from all of you all. You can just type in your, it may be right or wrong, like Max said, it's not necessarily the ultimate thing right now, but it's just a self-reflection. Okay, so Santosh Kasle says he's an achiever. Aparna Mehra says she's moved from a corporate executive to a coach and feels that she's an individualist. She also says people get annoyed when she talks about her journey.
definitely an individualist.
Prasad Kulkarni also says he's an achiever. Jonathan says, I really hope I'm a strategist, but I'm sure there are elements of this I could work on to improve.
Fantastic. Can I hear a couple more? I'm just really enjoying hearing these. Okay. All right. So I know I've only got 5 minutes left, so I'll go. But if there's any others, I'd love to hear those. So just in the same way, it's just really important to say nothing's about right or wrong. And you'll see Mark Zuckerberg in the news. He must be on a journey himself, especially yesterday. But he must. My view is he must have entered Facebook. And as an expert, he joined as a coder, and what the world now depends of him is he needs to move through these different levels as he's, there's a responsibility for him. So it's not about right or wrong. And many of the great things that get achieved in the world are achieved from different earlier stages of expert, achiever, diplomat, etc. So it's not about right or wrong. In the same way, if you have children, you don't prefer the 12-year-old to the 8-year-old. They're good at different things. So I'm just going to very quickly just touch on what to do if you find yourself in each of these stages, and then I'll just take some final questions on this. I'll finish on this slide. If you find yourself an opportunist, start becoming much more inquisitive and start listening more than you speak. If you find yourself in a diplomat, start doing things, living for yourself, and start perfecting a technical skill. So diplomats often live other people's lives. Now's the time to start living your life and perfecting a skill. If you find yourself an expert, take on a foreign assignment or take on a job that requires multifunctional skills or multicultural skills. That's the way to shift, one of the best ways. If you find yourself as an achiever, start really thinking about the worth of your goals and go for the most highest impact goals that you can make for society, for community. If you find yourself as an individualist, people laugh at this, but get a therapist. So whoever said I'm a coach and talking about my journey, I'm sure you'll appreciate that point. We at Bridge, we have a rule: you can't be at Bridge unless you actually have a therapist, because you can't take other people on a journey you haven't been on yourself. You need to clear stuff up and all that stuff. Write a journal, take up meditative practices, get mentors. Again, really important. Gandhi, I feel a bit nervous talking about Gandhi. I know all of you will know more about him than me, but I think he had 6 key mentors in his life. The same with Mandela, same with Rosa Parks, the same with Martin Luther King, and definitely the same with Lee Kuan Yew. All of them had a series of mentors that they constantly looked to help them think through about themselves and what they were doing with their lives. And then if you want to become an alchemist, take on a pressing societal challenge you have absolutely no idea how to solve. So I'm conscious I didn't mean to speak so long, but I know this was a complex thing. So I'm going to stop and just say, are there any questions or reflections?